Hi there. In the earlier videos of this series, we put a hollow grind on this blade. Now, finally, we've reached a point where we can put the working edge on it. It's going to be very quick and easy to do because of a hollow grind. Although, as I said in the earlier videos, the actual grind marks from the hollow grinding are never going to be part of a working edge, but they lay the groundwork, the foundations for a very easy process. So the actual final sharpening is going to be very quick and easy, but don't get lulled into a false sense of security. There's still a lot for me to talk about. There's blind alleys I can go down. It might take a while, but we'll make a start by looking at the different sharpening systems that are available to get this working edge on. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the different ways in which we can put a flat across the hollow grind. First one, Waterstones. I'm not a big fan of Waterstones. I know a lot of people are, and I'm sure they will give an exceptionally good edge, but I've not had a lot of success with them. Mainly, I think, because I don't treat them well enough. You can see this one has been chipped, and I didn't buy an expensive one. On the other hand, I know people who've got expensive ones and they never really want to let people use them, which might say more about their perception of my sharpening abilities, but I think they are a bit fragile. I know that this one is. They're easily damaged and they're high maintenance. You'll spend a lot of time flattening them and you've got to soak them. So, as a friend said, Waterstones suck. You can't just, I know there are some splash and go ones, but generally you can't just sharpen. You have to have some water and let it soak, and it's a bit too much faffing for me. I want to do my sharpening as quickly and simply as possible and still get a good edge. So Waterstones, not really for me. Diamond, however, I do like. I don't think it's ideal for a hollow grind, but as a way to remove metal quickly and efficiently, I think it's really good. This one, however, and the ones I have seen are too fine. This starts at 300, too fine or too coarse. This one starts at 300, finishes at 1000, which is too coarse for me. What is good though is that they're never going to dish and they'll always cut flat. So if you can find a fine diamond stone, great. I think that'd be a really, really good option, but I've not found one which goes as fine as I'd like. So the next system is the Scary Sharp system, which is normally used on glass with the 3M films, and it's very good. It was originally aimed at sharpening plain blades, so they needed everything to be dead flat, so they were going for plate glass. When I first started looking at this, I did think about getting glass cut, but it was very expensive. And then there was difficulties in transporting it, it could break. And also when you're using it, you've got the same issues. If you want to take it with you, you've got to be careful that you don't break it. And also the other issue with if you stab a plastic stone, you're okay. This isn't glass, but it looks like it. But if you stab a glass stone or chip into it, you can damage the edge. So I'd looked for some different options. And the first thing I looked at was Perspex, because it was clear and it was quite reassuring to have something which looked like glass. The problem I found is that I'd already decided on the adhesive, self-adhesive paper I was going to use. This is one which will peel nicely on wood. So I pretty much settled on that. I tried it on Perspex, and the problem you get is that Perspex being acrylic and the adhesive being acrylic based is, even though it's meant to release and peel, it doesn't, or it does, but it leaves residue, and you've got to spend, it's quite difficult to clean off, and if you don't clean it off and put a new layer on, then you get a bumpy surface, which rather undoes the whole, the whole idea of Scary Sharp is you've got a really nice flat surface to work on. So I started looking for a different plastic which would work, and I tested a lot of different plastics. I spoke to manufacturers and had a lot of samples sent down. This works really well, it will peel cleanly, and it sticks well enough. And the whole point is trying to find a balance between it not sticking so well it won't peel, but not sticking so well or sticking so badly that it peels by itself. And I had to test these at different time frames, so see what it did after a day, a week, a month, and this will stick but peel all the way through. So this is the system I'm going to be using. What I find particularly interesting is that I brought this along to Harrogate. I've just come back from the Harrogate Power Tool show, and I thought there might be quite a lot of resistance because I had spoken to some people about using plastic, and they came up with a whole string of reasons why glass was superior. And I thought the people who were interested in getting their plain blades perfectly flat would not be impressed with this, because one of the things is that a slide blade does have a slight curve to it, so a dead flat surface is not quite as important, because you're putting a curve on. If you put a curve on a slightly curved surface, you're still going to get away with it. And what really surprised me and amused me is I went around looking at the stall. I went to a stall of somebody who was selling, last year they were selling Scary Sharp system, and they were selling plate glass and the 3M films. This year though, they were using plastic as a backing rather than plate glass for the reasons I mentioned. There's slightly different options. Theirs didn't actually peel that cleanly, but it was nice and flat. It was bigger because they were sharpening plain blades. But for the same reasons that they'd made the changes, that there was a chance of damaging the edge, and it was just that much easier to move about with. What he said though is that if you've got glass, there's no reason to change over, but also there's no reason to buy glass because plastic is as good and in some ways better. So this is what we're going to be sharpening on. Okay, so we're going to be using this plastic holding block as the backing for the paper. I suppose you don't have to use self-adhesive paper. You can go down the spray mount or spray adhesive and then clean it off with acetone root, but really it just makes it more difficult. This, I spent quite a lot of time sorting this out, and it does work very well. So this is what I'm going to be demonstrating. You buy this in full sheets. There's different ways to cut it out, but I'll draw a diagram when I sell it, different ways to cut up a sheet, but this is designed so you get the maximum number of sheets or maximum number of strips from a sheet of paper. One of the issues is that I will be using different sheets of paper, of sandpaper, and they all come in slightly different sizes, so it's quite difficult to decide what to do. Basically, you will peel the sheet and put it on, and if you mess it up like that, it doesn't matter. You can peel it off and have another go until you get it right. It will just, and you won't tend to get air bubbles under it, and if you do, you can just take it off. But it really is that simple to apply. Right, this is it. I'm actually going to sharpen the blade now. I've got a backup because if it goes wrong, I'm not going to regrind this blade. I'll just move over to this one. It's another one I've ground. If it goes wrong, it's more likely I've said the wrong thing and I've done something terrible. But if the blades suddenly swap over, you know what's happened. Okay, I have struggled with getting a flat bevel in the past, but if you hollow grind first, it makes it so much easier because it will naturally want to sit flat. There's a few things to watch out for, and the first one is that a hollow grind, because it's hollow, the problem you've got is the actual edge is slightly shallower than the flat. So what I mean by that is it naturally, on the first few strokes, it will naturally want to dig in and cut into the paper. So what I'll tend to do is work away from the edge. However you want to do it is fine. If you've got a way which you can do it with a flat bevel, you're going to find it easy with a hollow bevel. So it's really not going to be a problem. Whether you want to be working this way or absolutely straight, I won't really mention that. I'm sure that there's enough videos on how to do that. I'm just talking about the differences with a hollow grind. So I'm actually going to start on 3000 grit paper. I know that sounds very fine, but all I'm trying to do is work through the scratch pattern. I want to leave the hollow in place for as long as possible. So next time I sharpen, there's still a good hollow and it's easy to pick up. If I start with a coarse paper, I'll get through it. I'll wear out the hollow much quicker, and the idea is to make it last as long as possible. So I'll make a start. First thing to do, I find, is to work away for a few strokes. and this stops the edge digging in. And I can actually see a burr forming already. Now I can go forwards a bit. And as I say, however you want to do it, be a bit careful of going in too aggressively and digging into, cutting into the paper. But it's not a major issue, paper's cheap. So that should be enough for the first side. And because we've used that side, I'll use this side, and now I'm going to work on the other side. This one, because I've raised the burr, if I go in forwards, it will be very easy to dig in. So again, I'll work backwards to start off with. And all I'm aiming to do is get through the scratch pattern. I'm not trying to get really big tram lines on it. So a few away, and then I can start going in. And because it's nice to balance it, I'll just go very gently, do a bit, but it just wants to sit flat. It's pretty hard to rock the bevel at this point. And you can see we've got two rails, tram lines, whatever you want to call them, starting. At this point, because it's been sharpened on the wheel with it going away, it's got a huge great burr on it, and I find it quite useful to cut that off. If you cut it off too early, if you try and crack it off too early when it's quite thick, I think that damages the edge. So I've been doing it at this stage. So all I'll do is I'll cut through a bit of end grain, and then also I'll cut the other way, just with a view of snapping off any burr which is there. And you'll notice I haven't, this is loose, and there's a good reason for that, because I'm using both sides. If you glue it down, it's half as effective, because you need twice as many plastic honing blocks. So don't glue it down to anything, use both sides. This is 7000 grit, so I can jump straight to 7000. Same thing, work away from the edge. Oh, I've got a bit of wood under it. Work away from the edge. Work away from the edge for a bit. And then you might as well swap it over and use the other side. And I'll go into the edge a bit now. I don't think it really matters if you go away or in. Oh. Although if you go in, there's always a chance of cutting a bit off. And that is just about all it needs. So I'm not using a huge amount of pressure, trying to work to the tip. Try not to talk while I do it. And there we go. So if you want to make the tip engage, you've got to lift slightly. But as I say, it's so easy compared to a flat bevel. And that is all you need to do to get through the scratch pattern. So you can see the sharpened areas. I've left the original grind alone, and we've got a decent edge all the way along. Just try and get a little bit more towards the tip. Yep. And there we go. Next thing I'd do would be to strop. In the past, if it was a flat bevel, I'm quite keen on using a suede strop, because I think a little bit of micro beveling, I know I'm saying we want to get it as flat as possible, but a tiny micro bevel, or maybe you should call it a nano bevel, is very good for maintaining the strength of the edge. But the point of this is that the tram lines that we've got here are that thin, they're about as thin as my fingernail, and if I push this into suede, any leather, you're going to be able to mark it. And the point is that this will also compress down, and it will give too much rounding. So at this point I would be going straight onto MDF. If you are carrying on sharpening and you're working out the bevel until it's almost back to flat, there's a point when I'd swap over to suede because it's there's quite a lot of metal to remove if you're just going on something which is really hard. So there's a point I'd make the transition. So if I'm using a flat bevel knife, I'll use suede. If it's hollow ground, I'll be using MDF because it's harder. And there's still going to be a little bit of compression on this because the rails are so thin. So I'll just rub on this one, a little bit of white compound onto here. There's a bit of non-slip underneath to stop this running about, and we'll be working away from the edge. You can instantly see black, which is steel being cut. And work away from the edge. And there we go, that is the blade sharpened. I probably could have done a bit more, but I'm trying to make the point that you really don't have to do a lot, because if you do, you're only going to have to go back onto the Waterstone, well, not Waterstone, the CBN wheel hopefully, and hollow grind again. So take off the smallest amount you can, so then it's going to be easy to sharpen next time. So that is pretty much the sharpening sequence. I can cut something if you want. I mean, it's going to cut. We did show some videos of this whittling hair, and it was actually a different sharpening sequence, slightly quicker in some ways. But what I found was, as though it had made, it's good clickbait, it did whittle hair very well. When we actually tried to cut wood with it, it was too fine an edge. It really wasn't that good. So one day I'll show you how to do it. It's not, it's not a massive secret, but it's not actually that useful as a working edge. And I suppose that's one thing I should say, is that one thing I've found about people I know, carvers I know, is that you think that they're taking these huge cuts, got really sharp tools. It's not necessarily the case. Quite often, the more skilled they are, the better cut they can take. They can take a better cut than me with a much blunter tool. It's about technique. And so, yes, obviously you want sharp tools, but don't obsess too much about going for the hair whittling sharp, because it's not about that. Your time is better spent carving than sharpening, which is why a really quick sequence like this is good, because you can get the sharpening out of the way and get on to carving where you're actually going to learn something. So this is the sequence I'd recommend, and it sounds like a huge jump going straight to 3000, 7000 white and done. But it's all you need to do. And why work through grits? I mean, I could tell you to buy every single grit I sell, but 3, 7 and white, and you're done.